Hey, my name is Tammy Legg, and this book talk is for MSED 8333, summer 2017. I decided to read Lawrence Sternberg's Age of Opportunity because of two reasons. One is that I teach psychology, and I thought it would be really interesting. The second reason is I teach psychology, and I thought it would be very applicable for my content area, and I was right. It was both interesting and applicable. In Sternberg's book, he says that adolescence has changed. And I believe that that's the central idea of his book. That adolescence is no longer what it used to be. It's a much longer period. It starts earlier, ends later. And his whole idea is that we're handling adolescence all wrong. As both parents, teachers, policymakers, we're not doing what we need to be doing for these students. We're looking at them wrong. We're not taking into account the developmental plasticity of their brains, and we are treating them in some ways like adults, in some ways like children, but we're not looking at the science and dealing with them from a scientific point of view. He offers suggestions as well as a lot of evidence about what is going on in the adolescent brain, as well as ways to better handle them. So I believe that's the central idea of the book, and he lays it out fairly clearly. I thought that Sternberg's book was not only easy to read, but well written. He cites an enormous amount of research backing up most, if not all, of his claims, and he also makes it easy to understand. I will admit having a psychology background made it easier, but I still think the average layman would be able to understand the majority of what he had to say. And it was interesting. It wasn't dry, it wasn't boring, and I think it was well written. There are a couple of things he says in the introduction that I thought were worthy of merit. He says, adolescence is changing, and it's changing in ways that make our prevailing views of it outdated, wrong, and even dangerous. This is on page 8. He talks about the age at which children mature physically being more worrisome than most people recognize, and that it doesn't bode well for physical or mental health, on page 9. He also says that the delayed transition into adulthood isn't nearly as problematic as the popular media have suggested, and as we'll see, it may even be beneficial. As the mother of a millennial who is 23 years old and who still lives at home and who hasn't graduated from college and who is about to join the military, I can certainly attest to this continual bashing of millennials and this assumption that they're lazy and privileged and self-serving, and they've been given a trophy and praised for everything, and I don't think that's accurate at all. So this really hit home for me. As I said, I do teach psychology, and so I'm familiar with Sternberg's work. That being said, there wasn't a lot in the book that was hugely challenging for preconceptions, because I think a lot of those preconceptions for me have already been educated out of me, so to speak. I didn't feel particularly challenged per se, although I will say that I was surprised. I've noticed that adolescence is beginning younger and younger, but I honestly didn't think it was starting at 7 years old. I find that horrifying and sad. Like I said, being the mother of a millennial, it doesn't surprise me that adolescence is continuing into the mid-20s. I have a nephew who's 29, he's still an adolescent. I have a niece who's 26, and I also have a son who's 18. The thought of putting him out into the world at 18 years old, he is by no means ready. So it wasn't so much a surprise as it was a reiteration of what I already knew. Would I recommend this book? Absolutely. I think it's excellent. I think it's a great blueprint for what we need to be doing with teenagers. I think it's good for parents as well as educators and policymakers to read. And I think that if they gave it a chance, it could transform our educational system. Why would I recommend it? As you can see from this little graphic, the teenage brain is still under construction. It's something we have to keep in mind. They're not grown, and our treating them as though they are is wrong. Your brain changes with experience and time. Even adult brains. And so we have to keep that in mind. Another way it would inform our practices is follow the authoritative parenting model. Be warm and loving, firm and fair, consistent and approachable, and listen to your children, whether they're your children or students. It would also inform my practices by using more collaborative work. And I'd love to see people use meditation and exercise at every age. What do I want to read next? Well, one of the things I want to read next is this book right here. I'm sorry about trying to get it at the right distance. Teach Like a Pirate. First of all, I love the title. And I love the idea of being daring and adventurous and sharing that with my students. This is a very popular book. I'm a very passionate teacher. I'd like to transmit that passion to my students. And I think this book would help me recapture that passion that, by the end of the year starts to wane a little bit. You just get tired and busy. There's a couple more books I'd like to read. I'm also in the process of reading this book, Grading Smarter, Not Harder, which is a whole new way of assessing. And I've already decided to change my assessment practices to be a little more up to date with formative and summative assessment. I'd like to close out by reading a couple of quotes from the book that I really thought hit home with me. Sternberg says, "We spend our time telling adolescents what they shouldn't do rather than guiding them toward what they should and can do." And on page 206, he says, "Our current approach has been calibrated to help young people survive when we should be helping them thrive. And thriving during adolescence depends above all on developing strong self-control." Lastly, at the end of his conclusion, he says, "The conversation, which needs to be held between educators, parents, and policymakers, quote, needs to be grounded in a new concept of adolescence, which recognizes that it is now a longer and more important stage of development. This conversation must also apply the insights into adolescent brain development that have emerged over the past 2 decades. Periods of heightened brain plasticity are times when our experiences are likely to have enduring effects. The brain will never again be as plastic as it is during adolescence. We cannot afford to squander this second opportunity to help young people be happier, healthier, and more successful. Adolescence is our last chance to make a difference." Thank you so much. Have a great summer.